Welcome everybody. This is Maya Dynamics 2 week 4. Everything is good to go. No questions in the chat window. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this week we're going to be working on an image like this. Okay, so we're going to stick to fluids, but I'm going to give a little bit of a change of pace to you guys. I know you're all busy with your simulations and lots of stuff to do. They take a bit of time. So this will be a little bit of a, breather this week for you. We'll still stay in topic, but I'm going to show you other elements that you're going to have to do anyway for your assignment and things that will help you blend, your elements a little bit better. So this image right here, for you guys on the for you Darius and you Ellie on the live class, I would like to ask you, how do you think this is achieved? Okay, so that image coming in the back there, how you tackle something like this. Keep in mind before you answer. Keep in mind that you have the ship here. This is the actual one that you're using. Oh, sorry, I'm talking like a... Never mind. Okay, my bad. I keep forgetting to share my screen. So let's do it again. Thank you for letting me know. So this image right here, this is the one. So let me just bring my Connect. And I wanted to put this so I can see what you guys are typing. Okay, so cool. This image, sorry. So this image in front of you, how do you think, or how will you go ahead and handle this situation, okay? Like I was saying, keep in mind that the actual geometry of your ship is right here for scale. And you can see that back there. There are lots of, obviously once we go through this class, there'll be through a lot of obvious things happening with this scene file, but and issues that you might find, but it's, in my opinion, doesn't look half bad. Okay, you can see there's lots of detail over here in the back wall. Okay, there's some mist in the front, but if you were to do a simulation with a container, okay, fluid container, you are seeing firsthand this week how complicated it can be, okay, or how intensive it is to just do the landing bit. So imagine if you had to fill an environment like that one, okay, with something. I'm not trying to say with this technique is going to give you the same fluid motion, okay, but if you were to do a bit of a sandstorm in the back, okay, that has some, have a massive scale, it wouldn't be moving too much. So fluid movement is a bit irrelevant at that point, okay, as long as it has some interesting evolution, okay. And even just as a still image, to do that with a fluid container will be nearly impossible at home. Okay, obviously this thing got done properly in Prometheus by MPC, and they do the right things, and they have tools. But if you're working at home on your own and you can come up with something that looks like this and it moves in a relatively interesting way, that is going to be your money shot in your reel probably, right? Or one of the ones you put at the front. So I didn't see any ideas, but I'll give you my idea then how to deal with this. First thing, I'm going to keep that one handy. Let me see if... Well, you can see I have a render running that I wanted to show you before the class begins, okay? Let me try to come back to it. Well, doesn't let me come back. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this is just one of the elements of this image you have in front of you, is this one coming in. So you can see it, on his, once it finishes. It takes a bit of time, of course. But the amount of detail is genius, okay? And the fact that you have a sense of light direction and self-shadowing and all that is pretty impressive. So I'm going to let this one run, okay, while we do the class, and then we'll see. First, we're going to deal with the stuff in the front. This what I like to call an ambient dust pass, okay? And it's going to be needed. If you watch the VFX Learning open source demo reel thing, you're going to find some of our students from previous courses, okay, they went through this already. They have created these ambient passes, okay? So an ambient pass is just, to me, a way to give a sense of atmosphere and depth to your shot, okay? Right now, we focus on the front, we focus on the engines, and they're looking really good. But when you start comping these things and you look into the distance, everything's going to be very sharp. So it might be interesting, okay, to add some sort of element. Some of you might say you can add in comp, and that's perfectly valid as well. But if you wanted to do it in 3D, or you had to do it in 3D for some reason, then this is what we're going to be starting working on right now. So I have a blank scene right here. And the way to deal with these situations, okay, when you're dealing with large scale fluids like that, they only need to be lingering in the air with some sort of ambient motion, something, you know, a bit more atmospheric than anything. You can easily do it with a container that has no simulation in it, and a container that is independent of its resolution. Okay, the detail won't come from resolution like you usually get from a regular fluid simulation. Okay, so for that matter, I can start simple just by, well, no, you know what, screw it. Let's go in straight to the Prometheus scene. So we have it on. I'm just trying to find the proper scene for you guys. It was probably last week. So let's go to week 3. And that should be, let's try this one. It's the same thing. This is for the Spanish class. I usually keep the scenes separate anyway, but it doesn't matter. This is the same thing. Okay, this is my setup for the landing, right? Given this is a different, I don't care in this scene for this container, so I'm gonna get rid of it, and it goes with everything. But let's say that we want to put now an atmosphere around all this, okay, to help us blend this effect. Putting a container with enough resolution to get good detail, okay, to get a lot of detail in front of the camera, at this scale, it's gonna be massive. Yes, you could go in and scale this thing down, but it's gonna have to be so small that the dynamics go to hell if you start to use a regular container with simulation, okay, with dynamic grids. What I will do in this case is something a little bit different. I'm going to make myself a container with no emitter, and I'm going to place this guy around, let's say, my entire area. Well, it doesn't have to be the entire area. Let's just say the area the camera can see, but all the way to the back. So let's go in and modify some numbers in here. Let's say 150 is not even going to be nearly enough what we need. So you can see how this thing can get out of hand if you had to simulate this. 300 might not even do it. Okay, so let's try 400. No, that should be about right. We're going to need a lot in X as well, so let's try 400 too. Probably a little bit more. And in Y, we're going to need, I guess, let's say 100, just to cover everything. All right. So if this container was simulated, you can see what we're dealing with in here. I'm going to show you one way to keep an eye. I don't know if I've said it. I apologize if I have already. If I already told you about this bit, but a way to get an idea where this thing is going to be, okay, or how heavy it's going to be on your machine, and if it's even possible or not, is to get a rough number. Get first the number of voxels that you're going to be simulating. So in this case, we have, okay, at a simulation, let's say that if we were to simulate this thing, and for now I'm going to turn off, keep the voxel square, okay, just to avoid what's going to happen next if I keep changing things in here. But basically what I like to do is get a number, my number of voxels, okay. If I were to work in a 1-to-1 resolution, or the ratio, sorry, that you know by now, speaking in terms of ratios, is much easier. Okay? I can see it in the community, and it's fantastic. Okay, it's much easier for everybody to get an idea how things are moving. You know how much detail you put in this thing. So a 1-to-1, we know that it's extremely low, and it's never going to cut it for an element like this. Okay, of that kind of a detail in front of the camera all the way to the distance. It's not going to happen. But if it was 1-to-1, okay, it means that I'm going to end up having 450, okay, times 100 times 450, or times 400, sorry. That means that I'm going to have 18 million voxels, okay, at a 1-to-1 ratio, which is not going to happen. You have seen in your simulation so far that you sometimes use ratios of 10-to-1, 5-to-1, 3-to-1, so forget it. Let's say, okay, that we were just going to use a 3-to-1 ratio in this container at this scale. That means that it's going to be, let's say, a 1350, okay, will be the size of the biggest axis, right? Multiplied by 300, multiplied by 1200, okay, that's, okay. that's it. Your computer is gonna catch on fire and burn your house down and everybody in the building. So 486 million voxels, never gonna happen. Yeah, there are techniques around that you can go and separate into multiple containers which don't interact with each other. You can go on for hours on this discussion. Okay, it's just not gonna happen at home with this technique. It's gonna take too long. It's nothing. Okay. So what we're going to do is just ignore the simulation. So I'm going to go into density, okay? Instead of being a dynamic grid, I'm just going to go in and say just static grid for now. I'm going to take my velocity and I'm going to set it to off. So there's no simulation. And I'm going to keep, this is the key. Make sure, be careful, you turn this off, okay? Because if you turn it on and you change a number in the base resolution, your number of voxels is going to climb really quickly, okay, to adjust to the new scale and things. So turn it off because we don't really care, honestly, for the resolution at the moment. All we're going to rely on in this first half of the class is just going to be the texturing of this container itself. So this is going to be an ambient path. So let's go ahead and try and look through our camera. Here we are. And let's go in and scroll down to the shading section, okay? And let's go and take, for example, our opacity, all right? There's nothing in this container, obviously. But let's take our opacity. Instead of map it, okay, the input object being the density, let's go and map it, for example, to and actually, you know what? I'm going to go to the top view for this. Right, so here we are. And just for the sake of this example, let's go like that. And let's go in now, and then, like I was saying, instead of mapping to density, let's map it to, let's say, the Z gradient. You automatically see that the whole box fills with something. And it's not just something. If you go to the to the display tab, you can hit, for example, to show you density, nothing in there, as rendered, yet you do have something, okay? Because density obviously hasn't been simulated. This is just a representation of density, but it's renderable. Okay, so if you go in and let's try to render this for this example to be. I don't know if his Mentor is going to be faster than Maya software. We'll see. Sometimes it happens. Looking through the perspective. Let's look through our camera. Okay. Looks black. My alpha channel is completely solid. Okay, so there's something going on. Okay, we'll figure out what's happening in a minute. So there's something that renders. If we go back to the top view, sorry, just trying to. There we go, top view. Okay, let's go in back into the shader section, and then let's go in and modify, for example, the input bias. Remember there's a sampling of this ramp. If I go to this side, then it starts to get less and less opacity, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Okay, so it's a static pattern, but it is opacity. There is density, a density that is just for rendering, not for simulation, but it does work. So I get that on my z-axis. For this example, the z-axis wouldn't be probably the right to do the gradient. Sorry, the y gradient would be a better one, where you will probably want. Sorry, this is just there. You go. You probably want to have, okay, now you can sample this way. You can see that it shrinks, okay, from the bottom to the top. And this is going to be the first step, okay, to deal with this situation. Let's look back and look through our camera. You can see that I can go in and change the sampling, but it's dealing with the height, okay, of this element. And I can also go in and modify my transparency, make it very transparent if I need to. And you can see kind of where I'm going. Try to render this one and see what comes out. Okay, something is starting to get there. We could take the ship and make it renderable if you needed some sort of reference. I don't think it's necessary at this point. You can kind of see the wing here. So let's go in and adjust these numbers. My point, and you can change the color as well. So let's go in and pick something probably around, pick to red. Okay, let's go and pick something like that. Hit render again. Okay, we're starting to get something. Let's go in and bring the opacity up. I'm going to do some adjustments here, and then I'm going to let you do yours, and I'm going to show you one that already has my values, okay, in there. The reason this goes dark like that is just there's no light peeking through, okay, so it's just very opaque. So we're gonna tweak it probably like this. We should start seeing something. Okay, you can see in here that there is actually it's better to deal first in the alpha channel of this. Let me bring the Y gradient up so we feel the environment a bit more. And of course it loses low resolution, but that's fine. First I'm just gonna get my bearings of where my density is gonna be. So perfect. This is the alpha channel, okay? So now what you need to do is go to your textures tab, texture opacity. In this case, a fixed grid is what I want because I'm not simulating this thing. So I want it to be static, the grid itself. And I'm going to I just turned it on, okay? Purling noise fixed, nothing has changed much, you know, I just turned that on and automatically you hit render and you start getting, let's give it a minute. Getting this, okay? I'm gonna stay with the alpha channel because it'll be the easiest way. Then you can light it, make it pretty, everything you want. But I'm more concerned at the moment is about the pattern and the noise pattern inside this fluid. You can already tell a fluid of this scale, this size, just by turning just the texture and section of it, we're getting a result that it resembles having something with a lot more voxels in it. The trick here is going to be playing with the actual frequency of your noise. The higher the frequency of the noise, the bigger, the more scale you're going to be giving to your effect. It's going to feel like it's a bigger thing. Where, you know, smaller frequencies, bigger patterns are going to just make it look like it's closer to the camera, and that's going to help you separate these renders into the front and the back, for example. Okay, you can play with the frequency. You can keep the same container pretty much, and just play with frequencies, different values of frequencies, and then just place those elements in comp, one behind, one in front, with different levels. Okay, I don't know how the color channel looks. Still a bit dark. You know, we can adjust the lights a little. I don't know what I'm even having here. Let's see, shadows. Let's just see if we can brighten this up a little bit to show you. But I prefer to show you probably my other scene, which is already there. So this is not self-shadowing. We should probably turn it on. We will make it even a bit darker. So let's bring in this ambient light. Try it again. It takes 34 seconds, okay, which is, for my class, okay, it feels like it's a bit much. You can always go in and change the shading quality. That's what I'm probably going to do now. Okay, so we get some detail in here. I'm going to stop this render because I want to see the height. Okay, so right now it's not very high. We know how to control that. We can go up here and take our input bias and crank this up even more. Try it again. Before I do that, I'm going to lower my shading quality just for my class. Okay, so I'm just going to take the shading quality from 1 to 0.5. That's going to help quite a bit. And this renders with Maya software as well, so you can test it with Maya software if it's faster. Okay, so something is coming through. Now maybe it's too dense, but we'll see. It's just black as hell. Huh? We don't have any lighting in here. Let's bump that up. No, it's very blue just because of my ambient brightness value. But now let's go in and modify a view of these attributes. Okay, let's go into the texture, back on the texture tab, which is right here. And let's modify, for example, the amount of influence of this effect. So 1.5 is going to poke bigger holes. Let's change, just make the noise pattern look bigger. Look prettier, sorry. By changing the depth max. Maybe the amplitude needs to be a little bit higher, okay? And I'm going to take my frequency and I'm going to bump that to a value of 2. Let's try it again. Let's go to the alpha. It's easy, okay? So it's very solid. That's opacity. We can go back in there. Sorry, and make this a bit less. Maybe I did it too much. The IPR will work for this. It might be a bit too slow probably for what we need to do. So still super solid. So let's go in there and go almost all the way. Okay, so it's starting to come through. You can animate this texture, okay, a little bit by putting an expression or by animating the actual texture origin itself, okay, the way. Remember, this is just, imagine what you saw at the beginning is a big block of density, and then you're poking almost like see-through, like, you know, like if you had a bit of a piece of paper with holes in the front. Okay, so you have to be careful to move it a little bit, but don't move it too much because you're going to give it away. The effect, right? People are gonna figure it out. But you can see the amount of detail that is coming through in here. Okay, it took 37 seconds. I'm gonna save it. This is with a frequency of 2, and I'm gonna try frequency of 2. I'm gonna try one with a frequency of 1. Okay, I'll just save that image before. Let's try one more, and you will kind of get this what I mean by the sense of the scale of this thing. Okay, by just changing the scale. The frequency, sorry, feels like it's a bit bigger. But I was saying that you could animate, for example, the texture origin, X, Y, or Z, and then move this texture a little bit left, you know, to the left, to the right, and give a sense of overall wind direction if needed, okay? But you have to be subtle with these things, okay? So today is more about scale in the sense of atmosphere and depth, okay, that you can get from this thing. So this is a frequency of 1. This is a frequency of 2. Okay, so it makes it feel like it's further away. Okay, the one with higher frequency and a bigger thing. Obviously, you can keep trying numbers and make it a bit smaller, but you can kind of get the hint. I'm going to show you one scene that I already modified certain things better. Okay, but basically that's the way you can settle this. Okay, there's no density at the top. It looks like it. Okay, so you probably have to now you know what you need to change in order to get this thing to rise more. You can play with the transparency, play with the noise. Remember that the noise is all here on the texture, and there's no need to. You could texture the color if you wanted. I don't know if it's necessary. There's no need to texture incandescence in this case. But basically, it's just a matter of playing with these values in here and get a noise pattern. Play with your light, and this will self shadow. This will cast shadows, receive shadows from the ship. Everything's going to be all the rules from the rendering of a fluid will apply. Same for everything. So what I'll do is I'll open a scene that I already tested, earlier where I changed some numbers and things to make things faster. There we go. So same idea. Okay, it's just this container has. I put in a little expression on the texture time, just if you want to render a sequence of frames, just so it moves a little bit. Let's render this one. Okay, so you can kind of get this sense, and by just playing with the amount of density, okay, the actual opacity of this. Let's go back up here. You can see that I'm adding color, okay, to my incandescence ramp in this case, okay. It's just to give it brightness, or just to give it a bit of change. But anyway, the incandescence, okay, you can call it, I could have called this anything, any name, color, if I wanted to. It's nothing because it's not really mapped to any temperature or anything like it. It's just mapped to the white gradient as well. And basically you think of this as ground level and all the way to the top. Okay, so as you get higher, it gets darker, and it gives you just different shades of color. That is one way to do it. We could have done it using the color ramp and mapping it the same way. It's exactly the same thing. And you add yourself a little modification of the ramp. I just didn't want to go through all this with you in front of you, okay? Shading quality of 1. You see banding in here. You're going to have to increase the shading quality and increase your, this takes 2 seconds to render, okay? So increase your render settings and you will get something more appropriate. But here is, that's all there is. You can just play with the opacity a little bit, and you can see already the pattern I start getting. And this is the scene that I'm using, the element that I'm placing in front of this. And it's a pretty large area, as you can see, okay? So it works really, really well. And it goes all the way to the distance as well. So that is a static container. You can use this technique to do clouds, okay, in the sky. Not, as long as they're not moving too much. Even I've seen tests from Autodesk back in the day. They did like sandstorms and things like that, because you can animate, remember, you could set it to like the opacity, instead of being the Y gradient, you can set it to X or Z and then animate this input bias and have this effect rolling towards you. Oh, this finished. Perfect, because we're going to move to this now. So, but yeah, before I jumped into this, I was saying that you could have animation on those values and have this effect, either wipe in from left to right, back to front, okay, animated. It's pretty handy and it's very quick to render. So, now that this render finished, let's go ahead and deal with the back section, okay? You saw the render, so let me just find it again. This is the same pass, okay? Or like the background pass, let's say. Now I can close this one, we don't need it. Okay, so it is gradient, not dynamic. Let me just quickly check here. So yeah, it's a gradient, not dynamic, exactly. You could leave it as static, okay? The dynamic grid, as long as it's not dynamic, okay, it's fine. But a gradient will work, of course. And yeah, I don't think there's any other questions, but feel free to type in there. But let's go back in here. So there you go. So this is the background layer of that other image, which I somehow, god damn it, I can figure out how to put them on top of each other. There we go. Okay, perfect. It's just this element plus the one I just showed you returns this image that is here. But so you can see that this works particularly well in this section. I don't know if I can do that. This section right here. Okay, these areas right there. There you will see now. You will start spotting. Okay, the trick. Okay, especially when you start seeing this sphere right here, or when you start seeing. The more I talk about it, okay, the more you will understand it, and the better you will say, oh yeah, I can see it, sphere, I can see a sphere, and I can see a sphere. So the trick here is going to be blending the spheres together. When they blend together nicely, you return this kind of stuff. It looks fantastic. I mean, I think that's awesome. Even as it's a very pyroclastic look, okay, very 2012 kind of thing. The difference, of course, is those guys, you know, when you're doing films like that, those clouds are moving. What makes it look super impressive and extremely powerful is when those pyroclastic clouds move really quickly towards you. And that you cannot really get with this technique, okay? So you have to pick your battle in this one. That's why those big studios have the technology they have. But at home, you can generate an image like this that has motion, is perfectly fine. I think it's very impressive stuff. So let's go in and deal with this. And once I tell you, it's like, you know, the magic is gone, right? There's no, this is the scene that generated that effect. But before I jump back in now, I just saved it for, let's save this image for later, because we're going to need it probably for reference. And I'm going to put it in the community if you guys want for reference, for you guys to try to match it. So let me save this quickly. Let me just pick something a bit more. There you go, that should be enough. And let's save this as Storm. Cool. So that way I can close this and come back to it if I need to. So let's go in and start setting this up. And the way we're going to do it, and I usually, this is the first time I'm doing it in this order, this course. You know, I was usually teach this class on week 8, but I thought, you know, maybe let's give a bit of a change of pace. So the reason I do it on week 8 is because it uses N particles, and I tend to talk about N particles later. But I'll give you a bit of an introduction because I can see a lot of curiosity in the community. You guys are really, you know, working a lot on things. So I'll put the info out there, and I know you guys are going to continue. When we meet again on week 8, then we're going to talk about N particles, whatever's left. So I'm not going to be focusing too much on N particle attributes and N particle motion. What I'm going to be focusing is on the rendering side of things. Particularly, N particles, you have to switch your menu from dynamics that we used up to this point to N dynamics. Okay, simple as that. You're going to get, it's pretty much the same kind of menu, all right? You're going to get, instead of particles, you get N particles. And we're going to create N particles. The only difference here is that with N particles, you have to specify what kind of N particle you want to create first. And it's just, honestly, it's nothing fancy. It's just the an N particle system is going to make, or is going to use a preset to get you to a specific point. So let's say, I'm not going to talk about all of them because there's no time for that. What I'm going to focusing on today is the one called thick cloud. So if I pick thick cloud, nothing gets created yet. You just basically selected a preset, and then you have to select an emitter to create. Okay, and I'm gonna make any emitter, whatever I had selected there before. So that's fine. So the N particle thick cloud, the beauty of it, okay, is that it creates, as you can see, it creates my N particle, my particle emitter, of course, my N particles, the nucleus solver, which is the one that controls the dynamics of this. And we'll deal with it later because there's nothing to talk about right now about this. But it also, as you can see, it creates a fluid container. Okay, and if you show it, because I think it's hidden by default, so render stats. Just make sure that it's displaying, and then it's showing fluids. Yeah, this thing is hidden somewhere here. Let me just figure it out. So. It's just a default container, nothing special. No, it's not there. Well, hell, I don't remember even how to bring it up, but yeah, I'll show you now. We're gonna change that container anyway. I'll show you in a minute what it looks like. But it's just a simple container with nothing special to it. And if I hit play, I get N particles coming out. The emission and all that is exactly the same as you know from level 1. Nothing different. So one thing to keep in mind is, if you have too many of them, it can get very slow on the render. So I'm going to start simple so you can see what's happening here. Perfect. And I'm going to modify certain things. I'm just going to make them move up by just changing on the solver, the gravity. And again, we'll talk about it later when it's time, but you can just explore in here. The nucleus solver has a gravity field already connected to this thing. So... But the default behavior of these N particles is to ignore the gravity. So on the dynamic properties, ignore solver gravity is on. Now we should get particles moving up. Perfect. I'm just gonna make myself a little cloud, little puff of smoke going up. I'm gonna make these particles die. Okay, I don't want them to live forever. So let's go ahead and say random range. This is simple Maya 1 stuff. These attributes are just controlled pretty much the same way as with regular particles. Nothing new there. Yeah, that's good to me. And if I get really close to these guys and I hit render, okay, you're gonna get that, okay, and I'm gonna have to probably get really close, or better yet, I'm gonna make these particles bigger. So I'm gonna change the radius, so particle size, radius. Okay, randomize the radius. So let's go ahead and hit render in this one. Takes a bit longer, as you can see, but there you go. You get this kind of look. All right. It's very, it has a lot of, it has a fluid look to it. Honestly, to be, it's a cloud particle. Okay. If you take the magic out of this, it's a cloud particle like you could with Maya, regular Maya particles. But he's using a fluid container as a shader, as a material to shade this particle. Okay, that is the trick behind this thing. So let's go ahead and modify. You can modify the fluid, okay? And there is a connection, by the way. It's a connection between particle attributes and fluid attributes, okay? You can drive the look of the fluid from the particle or vice versa. That is, so basically, some people can think of this thing as almost as instancing fluid container on top of each particle. Kinda, it's not exactly that, but it could be thought in those terms. Well, this is the beginning of what I did. So you can see that it renders. It takes 3 seconds, which is only a few particles on the screen, so you can be careful. The image that I rendered, which I think is worth checking how long it took. I know, oh damn it, I didn't put it there, but I know it took from the beginning of the class to this point. So it took about 30-40 minutes to render that frame. It's not bad for the amount of detail that you get, but it's something to remember, okay, when you're testing. So if you have tons of these particles, especially on top of each other, occupying similar screen space, it's going to get a bit messy. It's going to get a bit slow, but it's a result that you will never get with simulation. To simulate a container like that, even if you could get that resolution, it will take weeks probably. So it's not really, it's not too bad. Anyway, so go back in there. If I grab my container, let's just find it onto the fluid section. Okay, here. It's a regular fluid container like you've seen before. So you could go to the shading tab and play with these things. But you can see the transparency, for example, in this case is mapped to something. And is that something is the end particle transparency section. End particles have a shading tab that is very similar to fluids. You can see the menu is pretty similar. If you open the shading tab, you will see that it has, the cloud type, the particle render type. But it also has opacity scale, has color, incandescence even, okay, as a fluid will have. So you could relate to what's happening in here, okay? It's the same thing. You map it to something, you draw your curve, that's the usual stuff. So this means that I could grab the opacity, for example, of the particle, change it, and it will change the opacity of the fluid. Okay, you can see that it starts to look different. If you go to the fluid in here, you can see that my opacity, like I said, is controlled by that number. You could always right click in here and see, analyze what kind of connection is being made. So it works that way, but you can also, the color, is changed also through the particle. So you can go back in there and then pick a different color. Okay, let's say you pick that. Okay, it works. So you see you're driving fluid properties through end particles. What else is connected? Let's see, you have connected the incandescence as well, okay. This opacity ramp is free, so you could still play with this. So what I like to use, for that example, is to rely a little bit on fluid presets, okay, to be able to get me to a starting point at least, okay. So if you click on the fluid container and you click on the presets tab, we're going to be making our own later when we do it with Fire in the next week probably. But right now there's a few, you can play with this and see what they do. Basically the presets will just set numbers and attributes on your fluid and make it look like something. The one I'm interested in for today is the one called, is under the More tab, it's called the Thick Cloud Puff. And I'm going to hit replace, and it's basically going to change attributes and properties of my fluid and make it look like whatever. Right? And it actually starts to show up on my screen because one of the things that changed is the visibility of it. So if you go here, aside from my end particles being red there, I'm getting this. Kind of hard to say what, to look what it is. You can hit render in there and you get nothing because this fluid is set to not being rendered. But what I will do is turn off the display and then see what my end particles will look like. You can see that it made changes to my incandescence, to my opacity ramps. Okay, so it did a bunch of stuff. So what I'll go is, don't look at the fluid. I want to see what the particles will look like with that fluid assigned to it. So I'm going to say no render, no boundary. Go back to my particles, hit play. See what we get. They still look red, but it's a bit weird, right? But you can see that by assigning the preset, it already changed a lot. So what I'll do is probably go into my end particles and get rid of that pink red color that I have there, so we can focus on the change that really matters. So this selected color, let's just make that white again, just so they read only the fluid. But you can see that just by changing with that preset, it does a lot of cool stuff for me. It gives it a better look than what I had before, more detail, definitely. So that's perfect. But this is, I don't know if you guys spot the first problem in the main issue here, is that you can see that the container is instanced, or it's placed on this fluid, on these particles, I'm sorry, with the same orientation. Yeah, that is the biggest problem. You can also see, we got lucky in here, that when they start to blend together, it's not that big of a deal. You can still spot, the similarities here. But once they separate themselves, it becomes apparent the problem. Okay, we can fix that one, but what we cannot fix is the fact that when these particles get separated, they look like crap, or so that is a rule of thumb. Don't get these guys to stay, they have to stay close together, that's for sure. And you can kind of, that's what I was saying earlier, that you can kind of see it on mine, right? When they start to separate, then you can see, oh crap, it looks like a sphere. Now that I told you kind of where this is coming from, I put the atmosphere and it helps with the blending, but this one here, for example, catches my eye big time. So this guy should be closer to the group, or I should kill it if he goes on his own, right? But this is a very, very clear way for me to explain. But if you were to think of this section only, okay, this part, and extrapolate that and put more detail, it looks fantastic. And you can always, remember, you can always modify your, for example, If you go to the texturing tab of your fluid, okay, we're using space-time with a fixed method. Let's see the frequency. The frequency is 2.136. Let's say that we're gonna use 4. Save this one, render again. Perfect. That's with 2, that's with 4. So you can see how my point of today is that I'm tying up the previous one with this one. So the frequency of the fluid itself, which is static in this one as well, this fluid's not moving at all, it's not being simulated. It will help you to, give a sense of scale, okay, that you don't have with a simulated container. So this is a variation of that other technique. Okay, so keep that in mind for your scale. So now the big issue is the way that these rotations are all, there's actually no rotation. What I would like to do is tell these particles to get this fluid and rotate it randomly on each one, at least at the beginning at birth. And that will help me, get away with the way this thing looks. The beauty of M particles is they have the ability to calculate rotations on their own. Okay, something that doesn't happen with regular particles. So we're going to rely on this one heavily. So for that, you just need to activate the option for rotation. So on the M particle, there is a tab called rotation. Turn rotation on. And my advice to you, okay, you get rotation, friction, and damp. And you can kind of see where this is going. So rotation friction is going, if it's that high, okay, it's going to slow the rotations down as these particles collide. And rotation damp is just going to lose energy on its own. So if you really want to see the effect, it's best to lower these numbers quite a bit, especially the friction is very important. N particles, okay, you have to keep in mind something. N particles will calculate rotation if these particles collide with something, either with themselves, which they have the ability to do so, or if they collide with geometry. If these particles are just floating in the air with no collisions of any kind, you're not going to see it. There's not really a real, reason why these things should rotate. So that's something also to remember. So that being said, I'm going to take my rotation friction to a value of, I'm going to put it to 0 for now, for both. Okay. So I want the rotations, if they're going to happen and to move a lot, so I can really see if this is working. Then I can fine tune it later. And I was saying about the collisions, right? So I want to make sure that the thing is colliding with something. There's no geometry in my scene at this moment, but I can collide. These particles can collide with themselves. So if you go on the collisions, you have the ability to collide and self-collide. I'll go deeply into this in a few weeks. For now, just turn on self-collide. That will just allow them to hit each other. The thing with the self-collision is that you have what is called a self-collision distance. And this just the size of the collision model around it. So you can see this is a sphere. Perfectly fine. There's an attribute here called self-collision width scale, and it's set to 1. This means that this particle here is going to have a 100%, the collision model, is going to be exactly the same size as the particle. That's because the width scale is set to 1. So this particle is going to collide, for example, with this particle right on the edge. So these particles are never going to overlap. Same thing down here. So the tendency, okay, is to these particles to try to separate themselves. So you will see, let's hit play now. You can see that when they're born, they're separating themselves right away. So it takes them a bit of one frame probably, and then they separate. Okay, you move around. It's because the self-collision distance is not letting them get close together. If I take the self-collision width scale from 1 and I put it to 0.1, I'm allowing them to overlap up to 90% of their size, because the collision model is only 10% of the size of the particle. So now they're more on top of each other. They still collide, they're aware of each other, but it's a lot more subtle. Maybe 0.1 is not a bit too much. Probably 0.3 will be a good number. So you want some overlap. You wouldn't want to, especially with what I was saying, you don't want these particles to be next to each other perfectly, because they will look even worse. You want some overlapping because you can see that this is working. But I want to calculate some rotation so this texture moves around a little bit. So 0.3 probably, I'm just eyeballing it, so I'm not sure, but I think that should be okay. So let's let it play. I'm gonna give myself a few more particles because it's not really enough to do something interesting. So let's double it. Okay, and yeah, that should be all right. Let's come closer. Okay, and if you render this, sadly, you'll see the rotations are not passing through the shader. The particles are rotating, and I know they're rotating, but it's not really passing onto the shader because we're missing a step. And this is one of the things I hope is on the wish list for the next Maya, to make this part that I'm going to do a bit more intuitive and automatic, I will say. Is the particle has a rotation, it's not really passed onto the shader correctly. Actually, it's not been even passed at all. So you can I hope you can see it. The pattern is repetitive. Okay, so this blob here is there, and it's there, and it's here, and it's here. So it's everywhere still. It's not passing through. So let's go in and change, or actually let's go in and follow the steps. Okay, and this comes from Autodesk, from Duncan in Autodesk. Okay, Duncan is let's say the father of fluids over there. Okay, and he explained this how to do these steps. Okay, so it's not from me. Basically what we're going to do, we need to, if you go into your end particles, per particle attributes, okay, you have the usual stuff that you always seen before from Maya 1, but you also have one new one called rotation per particle, and this guy shows up if you turn on rotations. That's all. Automatically comes in here, and this attribute exists and you can query it. Okay, you can see the value. It's just it's fine, it works. It's a vector, right? Rotation. I need to find a way to pass this value onto my shader, specifically this value down here, the texture rotate. Okay, this guy is the responsible for rotating, right? The texture, sorry, the texture that, remember, I'm texturing my fluid. Okay, and if I play with the texture rotate, I can then alter the position of this thing, right? And I want to do this on a per particle basis, so I need each particle to pass that value to its own shader, okay, to its own assignment of the shader, in order for that to be modified and get a different look. And you will think that direct connections will do it, but it doesn't do it. Basically, what you have to do, okay, at least up to in this version of Maya still, you have to go to your end particles, and you're going to add an attribute, okay, a particle attribute from the list. Go to the very bottom, and you have something called the user vector attributes. Okay, I'm going to add user vector 1 per particle. Before I get any further, I'm going to save this theme because I've seen before that it gets temperamental and it tends to crash sometimes. Okay, so just to be safe, let's so we don't have to start from the beginning because it happened to me in Spanish and it sucked. Done. We have a backup in here. Okay, so perfect. So I added my vector, user vector 1. I'm going to connect rotation pp to user vector 1 pp. You can do it through an expression, or you can do it through direct connections. In this case, I don't really care, so I can just say user vector 1 pp, okay, is equal to rotation pp. Create, and that connection has been made. I'm just passing those two. Now, if you grab your particles, actually, you know, I'm going to be saving every step of the way, just in case, and you should do the same thing. Right, if you grab your particles and you go to the hypershade, you will see that what I'm trying to say with the connection. Okay, so if you graph materials on the selected objects, you do have a shader, so that the fluid assigned as a shader. So here is my fluid, okay, the fluid shader itself. This is the surface shader. Okay, what I care for is this one down here, the fluid. And you have a particle sampler like we had on level 1. Remember, particle sampler is the guy who is responsible of passing per particle attributes to the material that is assigned to the particle itself. Okay, so this guy goes and digs in whatever you ask for, and it passes to the shader to whatever attribute you tell it to. And this is the key. So I'm going to be passing from the particle to the shader. Okay, so middle mouse, drag and drop it like we did on level 1. Go to default. And here, what I'm going to be looking for is my user vector 1. I'm going to pass this to the texture rotate of the fluid, which bear with me because this is always a pain to find these things in here. So give me a sec. All right, here it is. Okay, so user vector 1 pp, which is already, you have three values. You can go to the texture rotate and you just connect. You can do it like this, or you can do it all at once. It doesn't matter. That's fine. Okay. So now the rotation of the particle is being passed on to an attribute, and that attribute is being passed on through the particle sampler to the shader, and up to this date. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, like I said, it comes from Autodesk themselves. This is the way to pass this information. Hopefully in the next version of Maya, you can just say, hey, pass the rotation, and it's done correctly. Especially because it gets a little bit buggy. Like from this point forward, it's unpredictable. The result, not the rotation result, is just the way that Maya behaves. I've seen it crash very often when you hit render. So if it happens, there's nothing I can do there. Just make sure you save your scene. So now hit render. Give me this a minute. And you can see that here it goes. First crash. Let's run it again. In the meantime, hey, you see guys are here, Keith and Dave. That's good. I'm gonna relaunch my scene. That's why I'm saying, keep an eye on your scene file and save it. Or we can do, given that it's almost time to end the class, I'm gonna open the scene file that generated this render, which is exactly the same thing. Okay. I'm opening my image one more time. Okay, the scene that created this. I'm going to open it up and show you what I'm doing as far as the arrangement of elements. So I'm going to go to my latest version of everything. So here it comes. So dissecting this a little bit is going, I'm going outside to see this from perspective view. Okay, so we go outside. You have the first container that we talked about the first half of the class, the static container as the texture, out. And the next thing is, if you hit play, you get that. And these guys are end particles using this technique. Okay, so basically I did exactly the same steps. I went in and I added a particle preset. Okay, let me show you the outliner. So I created my end particles using the thick cloud like we did together. I get a fluid, which is right here. Okay, that's the texture. You can see that I put the thick cloud puff preset because it puts notes on it. So I did that as a starting point. And then I went in and modified the colors a little bit, The thick cloud puff is very, as you saw earlier in the render, it was very blue and it's meant to be a dark cloud, okay, almost like a rain cloud. I don't change the colors to make it, suit my situation in here, but I'm relying on everything the same. Then you can see that my particles, well, these particles I don't think is relevant. You can do anything you like, but I'm emitting these particles of a soft body plane, okay, that is deforming to give me undulations, okay, to give me this irregular edge. You can use any technique you like, but this irregular edge is very important because, let's open the render that we did at the beginning. Maya Dynamics 2, let me just find that image that we did today. This one, right? Yeah. So, okay, perfect. So remember, this is a rough, not the rough. This is the background, the raw element background. Okay, the undulation is very important because it gives you self-shadowing. Okay, it allows you to catch light and dark. Okay, and light and dark, and from bigger clumps as well. So this is brighter than this side, right? It does feel three-dimensional. So this lighting is very important. These particles will self-shadow because they're very, very thick. The opacity is almost none. So getting an irregular edge is going to give you that's just lighting. It gives you a nice highlights and contrast, okay? So that's why I'm using this technique. I'm just deforming. I like soft bodies. You can do with end cloth, whatever you want. Deform a piece of geometry. Use that as an emitter. Emit your end particles. You can see that on my per particle attributes, I'm doing pretty much the same thing. User vector 1 is connected to rotation PP. Okay. and then I'm passing that on through, let's go back in there, Hypershade. So with the particle selected, you can graph the material and then see, if I zoom in, if you put the mouse over the connection in here, that's basic stuff, you can see that the second line, it says user vector 1 pp connected to the thick cloud puff texture rotate. No, no? So that's all there is. So each particle is picking a different rotation. Keep them close together, okay? That is a trick. Randomize the size a little, okay? And if you're gonna render a moving image of this, then make sure that you are careful with the amount of motion you put in there. It has to be massive, okay? So it has to feel that it has a lot of scale. So be aware of it. Move them slowly. Again, if you're gonna have to do something very, very active, 2012 kind of big volcano thing chasing you, as you jump into the plane, that's not gonna happen with this. But this can hold up to a certain extent, okay? And it's relatively cheap to do. And the fact that you get particles, you can modify them. I think it was. I'm gonna venture myself here. Is it Mike or Dave? One of you two are doing a tornado for your masterclass assignment. You can experiment with something like this because you get a lot more detail in there, okay? And it works really well, especially with low particle counts. So something worth trying. So I think, yeah, perfect. So let's see how, any questions, you guys? Let's see, randomly, but whoever has a question, just or no questions, also I also take it as well. You can type it on the chat window so I know. Does it stop crashing at some point? The scene file that I'm using, like the big one actually, doesn't crash for some reason. This big scene that generates this thing, it doesn't crash, but the simple ones with just a few particles, they do crash. I don't know. It does stop crashing. Yeah, just keep saving, just to be safe. Just keep saving your scene. That's there's nothing more that I can do. Dave, you missed the majority of the class. I'm sorry, Dave. Is it because of the daylight savings? You should check. Well, we changed the time 2 weeks ago, I think, here in France. So it's not going to happen again. But it's worth always double checking. If you have an iPhone or smartphone, just check what time is in London. It's always good to know. All right, so Keith, are you doing okay? Yeah, it's all right, man. Don't worry. It's being recorded, so you'll get it tomorrow. You can pick up whatever's missing. I think for something like this, you will have to watch it more than once, I think. So, live plus once more. So Keith is good. Claude, are you doing all right? How about you, Darius? Everybody, if you give me a thumbs up, I'm feel good to move on to my next class. The emitter was bad. All right. Okay. Well, perfect. So I'm missing Darius. Everybody's good. So Dave, Ellie. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna stop the recording. So thank you for the guys watching this. See you next week.